If you're a producer, there is a lot that you can learn from industrial beats. You can find so many unique ideas that can help you push your production in ways that you never thought possible. So today, let's talk about how you can make these industrial beats. I'm going to show you multiple sampling techniques, drum pattern ideas, composition advice, and a lot more. My name is Navie. I've been making beats for over 15 years. I've produced for artists, gotten millions of streams on my own music. Anyways, let's jump right in. Now, there are two industrial beats that recently caught my attention because both of these beats share similar production ideas. Let's see if you can spot them out. One is Don't Rely on Other Men by JPEG Mafia. And the other is Garbage Pail Kids, also by JPEG Mafia. These beats are similar in that they both use strange vocal samples, unorthodox drums, and a lot of distortion and/or noise. So this is the checklist that I'll have in mind while trying to make decisions for this beat. Alright, so let's start off by finding a strange vocal sample. As always, YouTube is a goldmine for this, but instead of looking for the typical soul or jazz samples, I'll start by exploring the stranger parts of YouTube. So how about we try looking up some ASMR videos? Now, I do not watch these videos to achieve arousal. Don't believe the rumors. The reason why I'm looking here is because all these videos have vocals, plus the likelihood that I find something strange in here is higher. This video here is called ASMR Singing You to Sleep, so this might be a good one to try. Hold it tight. Now, the reason why I say that is because the fact that this person is singing in this video will help me possibly build something more musical in my beat, rather than trying to use someone saying a bunch of random words and then trying to piece this together, having it sound like absolute nonsense in my beat. So the first thing that I will do is bring this into my sampler. Now, another great thing about this sample that I noticed is that it has a lot of noise due to the ASMR-iness of it, which also plays into what I'm looking for on my checklist, how I wanted noise and distortion. But first things first, I need to construct a loop out of this sample. There's this piece inside the sample here that I think would be a good starting point. The reason being, I like the bendy singing in here, but also this phrase is pretty simple. There's only a few words being said and a few notes that are being sung. It's not like she's singing all over the place, so this will make it easier to build around. So let's try breaking this sample down into smaller pieces and chops and play around with the timing of these notes. Now, I do like the first chop here. But for the second chop, let's slow this way down. Alright, so by doing this, I have created a pretty simple musical phrase to work with. Now, one thing that you're going to notice in these beats that I'm taking these ideas from, that I showed you earlier, is that the vocal samples in them aren't constantly playing throughout the entire loop. There are gaps where the vocals aren't as present, so let's do the same thing with my loop. I'll keep the first bar as it is, but for the second bar, I'm going to create a pattern that has more openness to it. Alright, so this sounds like a good start. It now has this sense of rhythm going along with it. Next, I'm going to pitch this up and down within a few semitones to see whether I like the way this sounds when it's not playing at its natural pitch. I think I like it here at -2 semitones. It kind of sounds eerie to me. So the next step I want to start doing is to play around with some effects. While I like the way this vocal sounds in terms of providing me a good framework to work with, I don't necessarily like the way it's sitting in the beat right now. It feels overly present. So I'm going to start by looking through Guitar Rig and going through some of these vocal presets to see what I stumble upon. Now, while this doesn't help me solve my problem of the vocals sounding too present, this does make the vocals sound distorted and scratchy and also a bit creepy. So let's run with this for now and see how it goes. But I'm going to do some EQing next and make some slight adjustments in order to get this to be a little bit more cleaned up, but also to get this to feel less present in the beat. Alright, cool. So that is number 1 on my checklist complete. I have a vocal sample in place. Alright, now before we move on to the next step, I want to reinforce the music that's in this beat right now. Currently, it feels like it's slightly difficult to get a sense of what the music progression actually is with just this vocal sample alone. So let's try to bring in an actual instrument and create something a little bit more solid. I'm gonna grab this distorted lead here, and I'll build a pattern that somewhat follows what my vocal sample is doing to, again, solidify the progression that my vocal sample isn't fully able to do on its own. Now it feels a bit more like this is turning into an actual piece of music rather than a random series of sounds. So now this new layer here is filling up the low end in my beat, but it feels like there's almost this gap missing between these two layers. Like there's a little bit of emptiness between this bass as well as the vocal. So what I'm going to do is clone this sound out and then play the exact same pattern at a higher pitch. You can hear we now have this layer of buzzing added into the beat. Now while I do like the general idea of doing this, I'm not entirely sold on the actual sound itself. It feels a bit too present. So I could go into the plugin and start changing some of the parameters, but I think an EQ is all that's needed here. I'm going to drastically cut away the parts of the sound that are already being filled by my first synth layer since I don't need those frequencies from this sound. And now I feel like the overall balance in the beat is better after this. Now, one thing that you'll notice about this pattern that I built here using these sounds is that I also created open pockets here. The reason why I did this is because these sounds are over the top and super distorted, so it can easily end up making my beat feel way too full. Therefore, I composed in a way that hopefully combats this and provides a better sense of balance and openness. Now, looking at my list again, while I do feel as though I've done a good job of introducing distortion and noise into this beat, I do want to introduce some actual deliberate noise layers for more detail. So let me go into my library of weird noises and sounds and see if I can find some layer or noise that will fit into this beat. I have no idea if this layer will work, but let's experiment and try. Now clearly this sound doesn't last long, so let's first stretch this layer of noise out. Alright, this is now more functional. Next, let's create a pattern using this stretched out noise sample. Alright, so with this layer, let us officially cross this off the list. The only thing left is the unorthodox drums. Whether it's the textures themselves or the patterns that I build, or maybe even both, I want to do something a little bit more unusual instead of relying on the typical trap or boom bap ideas that I might be comfortable doing. So I'll start by looking through this pack of sounds that I got from Frolin Music. Just to be 100% transparent, they sent me this a long time ago. They're not sponsoring this video or anything. These are just drum sounds that I have in my library that feel closer to the typical acoustic drum sets rather than hip-hop drums. So this might be a scenario where these drums might fit my idea. What I'm going to do with these drums is open up the FPC, which is basically a tool that lets you use multiple drum sounds and create patterns all within one piano roll. It's kind of like an MPC. And I'll just load up a bunch of different drums into this guy. Now, what you'll notice about these drums that I chose to use is that they are similar drum textures, but they just have slightly different tonality to them, which is exactly what this drum kit provides. You can see it gives you multiple variations of the exact same sound fundamentally. And what this will do is let me create a drum pattern that sounds real rather than electronically produced, just because I'll have variations of the exact same sound, which sounds a little bit more authentic. And I will say, even if you don't have a drum kit that allows you to do this, you can still do this idea manually. For example, you can take any drum texture that you have and just clone it out. Then you can just make slight alterations to it. Maybe you change its shape, maybe you change its pitch slightly, or add some recoloring effect on top. It's all up to you. And this can be enough to create slightly different tones using the exact same sound. And by doing this over and over again, you can create variations of the exact same drum sound and then use them all to create a more robust pattern. It's a lot of work, but this is an idea that can work well with these kinds of beats. Anyways, I have a bunch of drum sounds loaded up. Now let's create a pattern using these sounds. Like I mentioned before, I want to create an unorthodox drum pattern, so let me start by being a little bit more creative here. I'll begin this beat with multiple kicks all in a row. Now you'll notice in my bank of sounds I don't have any hi-hats. I'm going to do my best to forego using hi-hats to fill up space and instead try using my snares. Again, this is just me being a little bit unorthodox. Alright, so this sounds cool. Now sometimes the problem with these kinds of acoustic drums is that they don't actually cut through in your beat as much as traditional typical hip hop drums do. So let's hear how this sounds while my other layers are actually playing. Yeah, that's what I thought would happen. So these drums sound a bit weak, especially the kicks. So one thing that I'm going to do is layer a more punchy kick underneath these acoustic drums. And as for the snares, I'm going to use my trusty distortion tool here. The reason why this works is because it will create higher frequencies into my sound. And my hope is with these higher frequencies, these snares will actually be able to cut through the mix a little bit more. Alright, cool. I think I'm happy with what's happening in this beat, and those are all 3 of these checked off the list. When I arrange this beat out, I'm going to probably push the arrangement a little bit more, so there's going to be a lot of ideas coming in and out, just to create a little bit more variation overall. But I do think it would be a good idea to create a more conventional, traditional hook section that will bring the energy level of the beat up a bit more. So to do this, I'm going to start by cloning out my current pattern and start making changes to it, and maybe add a few things into this beat idea. First off, to really bring up the energy level of this beat, I am going to close the gaps between these synth notes and make them one long note. Again, this is going to make the beat sound much, much bigger, which might not be a good idea for a verse section, but for a hook, it might be appropriate. But I'm also going to try and find another strange sample that I can layer on top of this beat. This seems like it will fit the aesthetic that I'm going for. Very noisy, very distorted, and also atonal. So it should be easy to just slip into my beat as a layer of detail. And I'm going to add a little bit more into this drum pattern. So now we have a more traditional hook section. Alright, cool. So now I'm going to basically arrange this beat by going between these 2 pattern ideas and taking and adding away stuff all throughout. And that is it. If you like this beat, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe. And that's about it. Don't really have anything else to say. So yeah, I'll see you next week. Bye bye.